So I'm sitting here with Richard Thorpe. Thank you, Richard, for joining me for this conversation. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
So I'm Richard Thorpe. My background's in professional rugby. So for 13 years I was a Premiership, Championship and International rugby player in the UK. I then transitioned out of pro sport in 2016 to set up my family's private office. Since then, I've not only been running the family office, but I've also built a coaching business where I work with professional athletes and next generation high net worth families. I suddenly found myself struggling to get out of bed in the morning. Everything's going well. I'm still playing. I've got a girlfriend. We're living together. I've got good friends around me. Family's going well. But I was just struggling to get out of bed. I was pressing the snooze button one too many times. And as the weeks passed by, I started to feel myself pulling away from people that are closest to me. And a year later, almost on the nose, the same thing happened. Couldn't get out of bed in the morning. Feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness. I started to not want to eat the amounts that I would typically be eating. I mean, as a professional rugby player, I mean, we've got to be putting 4,000 to 5,000 calories into our body a day. Exactly, yeah, just in order to keep up with the expenditure. Yet, I really struggled to eat. Again, didn't want to engage with anyone. I would, at the end of the training day, leave as soon as I possibly could, often without even showering, just grab my bag, get in the car and go home, in order to just sit on the sofa, be away from everyone, lock myself away from the world. Because that inside is what I felt I needed to do.
How you gained that insight and also how you could leverage that insight into actually addressing the issues you were facing.
Yeah. So coming out of my second episode, I looked back over the last 2 years and thought, well, what was that all about? My primary symptom was I was just tired all the time. So I sought help with Google, and I typed into Google, why am I so tired all the time? Simple as that. Up came depression, anxiety, mental health. All these things are linked to depression and mental health. What came out of my research, so I started to delve a little bit deeper and realised that, okay, I'm probably struggling with depression. There were 10 things, clearly, 10 bullet points of symptoms of struggling with depression, and I just went tick, tick.
And what did you find out for yourself as a possible reason why you were undergoing these depressive episodes?
Well, I worked with a psychotherapist for 2 years. Over the course of that time, we started to explore things in my past. Over the course of that 2-year period as well, I started to struggle with depression again. So that during that time, the person I was working with had to help me through that. You can't do much reflective work when you're currently struggling. Right. With depression. You need some different help. But as I came out of that and continued to work with the psychotherapist, we were able to start to unpick certain things in my past. And what we uncovered was when I was 13, my sister was killed in a car crash. Obviously, I was always aware of that. I was always aware that was very tough on me and my family, and the people closest to our family. But I hadn't quite appreciated the long-term impact that it had on me.
In how far did it manifest itself in your behavior? Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah. So, looking after other people at the expense of yourself, remember. So, I didn't grieve for my sister until I was in my early 20s. The actual emotional process of of bereavement, of grief, I didn't actually go through that process fully until I was in my early 20s. I was preoccupied and focused on helping other people around me. That's what's referred to as a people pleaser or a rescuer.
Very often, as I mentioned, you actually see that is people who experience significant adversity, a trauma of sorts, as a way to cope and self-medicate the loss and emptiness, to throw everything they've got behind a goal. So you can only speculate that, why amongst very successful individuals and families, there's a high incidence of mental health issues, addiction, fueled by possible trauma at some point, that actually has led him to become successful.
Yeah.
So that's a possible correlation between, an explanation between the correlation of success and mental health problems. Text.
Yeah.
So my question to you would be, in that specific context, what would be your advice for any professional athlete around the theme of retirement planning and the mental health dimension?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably like to tackle that question in two parts, because some athletes are going to retire, they're going to start their new life, and then they're going to run into emotional or financial troubles, and now it needs a reactive answer. To answer reactively, my experience was that I actually wasn't clear on my purpose. Now that I wasn't a professional rugby player anymore, who am I? What is it that I'm doing? But here's the thing, I thought I knew. My values were centered around materialism. Certain amounts of money that I'm going to earn from my businesses, houses that I'm going to live in, etc. My values and my goals were materialistic. Going through that next episode of really struggling, not being able to get out of bed in the morning, pulling away from everyone, yet having been through this before, I was able to immediately go and seek the proper help, speak to the right person, and we started to talk around purpose. And what I discovered is that my values that I thought were important to me actually weren't. The most important things to me are my friends and my family, as my health and well-being of both myself and others, in particular my friends and my family. The advice I would give to second generations now is to be mindful of that. Just be aware of it as a first instance. That, have you actually been sheltered most of your life? Do you have much adversity, experiences in your past which have forced you to grow? Sometimes adversity is what builds emotional resilience. Just being mindful of that, pushing yourself to the edge of your comfort zone, maybe extending your boundaries, not only it could lift your life into a more successful place, but don't be afraid of any potential adversity that might be there, because actually that could be an opportunity in and of itself.
So you could argue that when you're retiring as a professional athlete, you are going through withdrawal symptoms because you're not playing the game anymore. So you compensate that with gambling, possibly drugs, possibly...
That's exactly it. And perhaps professional athletes are weaning themselves off a career in professional sport through recreational drugs and gambling, because both of those are quite prevalent in retired professional athletes. Because the earlier you can start getting educated, exploring work and work experience, researching and reading around mental health and trying to understand yourself from a psychological perspective can be very useful. Clubs have a duty of care to look after their players that have devoted their lives to creating success for the club on the field. And when they're no longer in the game, they should be looked after. The tough question is, well, how should they do that? Should it be proactive or reactive? Should there be an alumni? If you've ever played for Manchester City before, we're always going to look after you. probably not the right way to do it. What is the right way to do it? To take an example from professional rugby, there are two teams that are currently leading the way for Premiership rugby in the United Kingdom. That's Saracens and Exeter. Saracens, spearheaded by their owner, Nigel Ray, require every player to be doing something outside of the game, outside of training, building towards something that they can go into when they can no longer play the game.
Particularly in a career-ending transition, how can that be practically alleviated? Do you have any suggestions for families of professional athletes, for instance, to be more aware or better prepared, or what can they do?
The obvious thing to look out for is, if you're a family member or a close friend of a retired professional athlete, is to look out for behavioural changes. So are they sleeping more or less than what they normally were? Are they eating more or less than what they usually would? Are they pulling away? When you call them, do they not pick up? When you text them, do they not text back for a couple of days? Do they cancel appointments and meetings? Do they look and act as though they're in a fog?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.